I must do it myself, then, said the Red Queen, and she began. Hush-a-bye, lady, in Alice's lap. Till the feast's ready, we've time for a nap. When the feast's over, we'll go to the ball. Red Queen and White Queen and Alice and all. Now you know the words, she added as she put her head down on Alice's shoulder. Just sing it through to me. I'm getting sleepy too. In another moment, both queens were fast asleep and snoring loud. What am I to do? Exclaimed Alice, looking about in great perplexity, as first one round head and then the other rolled down from her shoulder, and lay like a heavy lump in her lap. I don't think it ever happened before, that anyone had to take care of two queens asleep at once. No, not in all the history of England. It couldn't, because there was never more than one queen at a time. Do wake up, you heavy things, she went on in an impatient tone. But there was no answer but gentle snoring. The snoring got more distinct every minute and sounded more like a tune. At last she could even make out the words, and she listened so eagerly that when the two great queens vanished from her lap, she hardly missed them. She was standing before an arched doorway over which the words Queen Alice in which were the words Queen Alice in large letters. And on each side of the arch there was a bell handle. One was marked Visitor's Bell and the other Servant's Bell. I'll wait till the song's over, thought Alice, and then I'll ring. Which bell must I ring? She went on, very much puzzled by the names. I'm not a visitor, and I'm not a servant. There ought to be one marked Queen, Just then the door opened a little way, and a creature with a long beak put its head out for a moment and said, "No admittance till the week after next," and shut the door again with a bang. Alice knocked and rang in vain for a long time, but at last a very old frog, who was sitting under a tree, got up and hobbled slowly toward her. He was dressed in bright yellow and had enormous boots on. "What is it now?" the frog said in a deep, hoarse whisper. Alice turned around, ready to find fault with anybody. "Where's the servant whose business it is to answer this door?" she began angrily. "Which door?" said the frog. Alice almost stamped with irritation at the slow drawl in which he spoke. "This door, of course." The frog looked at the door with his large, dull eyes for a minute, and went nearer and rubbed it with his thumb as if he were trying whether the paint would come off. Then he looked at Alice. "To answer the door?" he said. "What's it been asking of?" He was so hoarse that Alice could scarcely hear him. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "I talks English, doesn't I?" the frog went on. "Or are you deaf? What did it ask you?" "Nothing," Alice said impatiently. "I've been knocking at it." Shouldn't do that, the frog muttered. "Vexes it, Then he went up and gave the door a kick with one of his great feet. "You let it alone," he panted, as he hobbled back to his tree, "and it'll let you alone, At this moment the door was flung open, and a shrill voice was heard singing. To the looking-glass world it was Alice that said, "I've a scepter in hand, I've a crown on my head. Let the looking-glass creatures, whatever they be, come and dine with the Red Queen, White Queen, and me." And hundreds of voices joined in the chorus. "Then fill up the glasses as quick as you can, and sprinkle the table with buttons and bran. Put cats in the coffee and mice in the tea, and welcome Queen Alice with 30 times 3. Then followed a confusing noise of cheering, and Alice thought to herself, 30 times 3 makes 90. I wonder if anyone's counting. In a minute there was silence again, and the same shrill voice sang another verse. "O looking-glass creatures," quoth Alice, "draw near. 'Tis an honor to see me, a favor to hear. 'Tis a privilege high to have dinner and tea, along with the Red Queen, White Queen, and me." Then came the chorus again. "Then fill up the glasses with treacle and ink, or anything else that is pleasant to drink. Mix sand with the cider and wool with the wine, and welcome Queen Alice with 90 times 9. 90 times 9, Alice repeated in despair. "Oh, that will never be done. I better go in at once." And there was dead silence the moment she appeared. Alice glanced nervously along the table as she walked up to the large hall, and noticed that there were about 50 guests of all kinds. Some were animals, some birds, and there were even a few flowers among them. "I'm glad they've come without waiting to be asked," she thought. "I should never have known who were the right people to invite." There were 3 chairs at the head of the table. The Red and White Queens had already taken 2 of them, but the middle one was empty. Alice sat down in it, rather uncomfortable in the silence and longing for someone to speak. At last the Queen began. "You've missed the soup and fish," she said. "Put on the joint." And the waiter set a leg of mutton before Alice, who looked at her rather anxiously, and she had never had to carve a joint before. "You look a little shy. Let me introduce you to that leg of mutton," said the Red Queen. "Alice, mutton. Mutton, Alice." The leg of mutton got up in the dish and made a little bow to Alice, and Alice returned the bow, not knowing whether to be frightened or amused. "May I give you a slice?" she said, taking up the knife and fork and looking from one queen to the other. "Certainly not," the Red Queen said very decidedly. "It isn't etiquette to cut anyone you've been introduced to. Remove the joint." And the waiters carried it off, and brought a large plum pudding in its place. "I won't be introduced to the pudding, please," Alice said rather hastily, "or we shall get no dinner at all. May I give you some?" But the Red Queen looked sulky and growled, "Pudding, Alice. Alice, pudding. Remove the pudding!" And the waiters took it away so quickly that Alice couldn't return its bow. However, she didn't see why the Red Queen should be the only one to give orders, so as an experiment she called out, "Waiter, bring back the pudding!" And there it was again, in a moment, like a conjuring trick. It was so large she couldn't help feeling a little shy with it, as she had been with the mutton. However, she conquered her shyness by a great effort, and cut a slice and handed it to the Red Queen. "What impertinence!" said the pudding. "Wonder how you'd like it if I were to cut a slice out of you, you creature!" Spoke in a thick, suety sort of voice, and Alice hadn't a word to say in reply. She could only sit and look at it and gasp. "Make a remark," said the Red Queen. "It's ridiculous to leave all the conversation to the pudding." "Do you know I've had such a quantity of poetry repeated to me today?" Alice began, a little frightened at finding that, the moment she opened her lips, there was dead silence, and all eyes fixed upon her. "And it's a very curious thing, I think, that every poem was about fishes in some way. Do you know why they're so fond of fishes all about here?" She spoke to the Red Queen, whose answer was a little wide of the mark. "As to fishes," she said, very slowly and solemnly, putting her mouth close to Alice's ear, "Her White Majesty knows a lovely riddle, all in poetry and all about fishes. Shall she repeat it?" "Her Red Majesty's very kind to mention it," the White Queen murmured into Alice's ear, in a voice like the cooing of a pigeon. "It would be such a treat. May I?" "Please do," said Alice politely. The White Queen laughed with delight and stroked Alice's cheek. Then she began. "First, the fish must be caught. That is easy. A baby, I think, could have caught it. Next, the fish must be bought. That is easy. A penny, I think, would have bought it. Now cook me the fish. That is easy, and will not take more than a minute. Let it lie in a dish. That is easy, because it is already in it. Bring it here, let me sup. It is easy to set such a dish on the table. Take the dish cover up. Ah, that is so hard that I fear I am unable, for it holds like like glue, holds the lid to the dish, while it lies in the middle, which is easiest to do. Undish the cover the fish, or dish cover the riddle. Take a minute to think about it, and then guess," the Queen said. The Red Queen. "Meanwhile, we'll drink your health. Queen Alice's health," she screamed at the top of her voice, and all the guests began drinking it directly, and very queerly they managed it. Some of them put their glasses on their heads, like extinguishers, and drank all that trickled down their faces. Others upset the decanters and drank the wine as it ran off the edges of the table, and 3 of them, who looked like kangaroos, scrambled into the dish of roast mutton and began eagerly lapping up the gravy. "Just like pigs in a trough," thought Alice. "You ought to return thanks in a neat speech," the Red Queen said, frowning at Alice as she spoke. "We must support you, you know," the White Queen whispered as Alice got up to do it, very obediently but a little frightened. "Thank you very much," she whispered in reply, "but I can do well without." "That wouldn't be all the thing," the Queen said very decidedly. So Alice decided to submit to it with good grace. "And they did push so," she said afterwards, when she was telling her sister the story of the feast. "You would have thought they wanted to squeeze me flat. In fact, it was rather difficult for her to keep her place while she made her speech. The 2 queens pushed her so, one on each side, that they nearly lifted her up into the air. I rise to return thanks," Alice began. And she really did rise as she spoke several inches, but she got a hold of the table and managed to pull herself down again. "Take care of yourself," screamed the White Queen, seizing Alice's hair with both hands. "Something's going to happen." And then, as Alice afterwards described it, all sorts of things happened in a moment. The candles grew up to the ceiling, looking something like a bed of rushes with fireworks at the top. As to the bottles, they each took a pair of plates, which they hastily fitted on wings, and so, with forks for legs, went fluttering about in all directions. And very like birds they look, Alice thought to herself as well as she could, in the dreadful confusion that was beginning. At this moment, she heard a hoarse laugh at her side, and turned to see what was the matter with the White Queen. But instead of the Queen, there was that leg of mutton sitting in the chair. "Here I am," cried a voice from the soup tureen, and Alice turned again just in time to see the Queen's broad, good-natured face grinning at her for a moment over the ledge of the tureen, before she disappeared into the soup. There was not a moment to be lost. Already several of the guests were lying down in dishes, and the soup ladle was walking up the table toward Alice's chair, and beckoning her impatiently to get out of its way. "I can't stand this any longer," she cried as she jumped up and seized the tablecloth with both hands. One good pull, the plates, the dishes, guests, and the candles came crashing down together in a heap on the floor. "And as for you," she went on, turning fiercely upon the Red Queen, whom she considered as the cause of all mischief. But the Queen was no longer at her side. She had suddenly dwindled down to the size of a little doll, and was now on a table, merrily running around and around after her own shawl, which was trailing beside her. At any other time, Alice would have felt surprised by this, but she was far too much excited to be surprised at anything now. "As for you," she repeated, catching hold of the little creature in the very act of jumping over a bottle which had just lighted upon the table, "I'll shake you into a kitten